DataVersity. We'd like to thank you for joining today's DataVersity webinar, Reference and Master Data Management, Unlocking Business Value. It is the latest installment in the monthly series called Data Ed Online with Dr. Peter Aiken, brought to you in partnership with Data Blueprint. Just a couple of points to get us started. Due to the large number of people that attend these sessions, you will be muted during the webinar. If you'd like to chat with us or with each other, we certainly encourage you to do so. Just click the chat icon in the bottom middle for that feature. For questions, we will be collecting them via the Q&A in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, or if you'd like to tweet, we encourage you to share highlights or questions via Twitter using hashtag DataEd. And to answer the most commonly asked questions, as always, we will send a follow-up email to all registrants within 2 business days containing links to the slides. And yes, we are recording and will likewise send a link of the recording of this session, as well as any additional information requested throughout the webinar. And Peter, we're seeing a gray screen, or I am at least.
Interesting. I hope that's not for everybody.
Yeah, I see your keynote at the top.
I know what it is.
Okay.
How about that?
Well, you're
Better?
dusting that. Let me introduce you. Let me introduce our speaker for today, Dr. Peter Aiken. Peter is an internationally recognized data management thought leader. Many of you already know him or have seen him at conferences worldwide, still seeing gray. He has more than 30 years of experience and has received many awards for his outstanding contributions to the profession. Peter is also the founding director of Data Blueprint. He has written dozens of articles and 11 books. The most recent is Your Data Strategy. Peter is experienced with more than 500 data management practices in 20 countries and consistently named as a top data management expert. Some of the most important and largest organizations in the world have sought out his and Data Blueprint's expertise. Peter has spent multi-year immersions with groups as diverse as U.S. Department of Defense, Deutsche Bank, Nokia, Wells Fargo, the Commonwealth of Virginia, and Walmart. And with that, let me turn over to Peter to get today's webinar started. Hello and welcome, and I'm still seeing gray.
Wow, this is a problem, Shannon. I don't know what's going on here. I have done exactly what's supposed to. But let's see.
Because we're seeing. I see your header at the top. I see Keynote, File, Edit, Insert. I see your toolbar at the top. But
I'm going to shut down one screen here, and maybe that's what it'll do it. Okay, and we don't usually have this problem. Yeah.
Don't know what happened. We broke it with our picture.
So I'm getting this share content, but now it's not letting me share my, wow.
All right, folks, you know technology is great when it works. So if you go to the bottom middle.
Change it back to you and let you change it back to me.
That works. Let's reboot.
So sorry, ladies and gentlemen, we have not usually run into these kind of problems. All right, pass it back.
Okay.
And there on the presenter. No, when I go to share, it says share content, and I see share file and new whiteboard, and that's it. I do not know what's going on with WebEx.
You should see share desktop.
Nope, I get share content and then share file, and that's it.
You were just sharing your screen.
I know.
Okay, send me the file, and let's get started. We will figure this.
You got Keynote? On its way. I'll continue to work on this. What on earth is going on? Let's just go. There we go. I'm the presenter. Got it now. Okay. Don't know what was going on. And we're back. And you can see?
It's not yet. It's coming up. There we go.
All right, so apologetic for missing 4 minutes of you guys' valuable time. My apologies. We'll still squeeze it all in. So hi and welcome, and thanks, Shannon, as always, for coaching us through this stuff. So what we're going to cover today is starting off with a data management overview that I'd like to just sort of set the context. And then we're going to do a little bit of introduction to reference and master data. We always talk about MDM, but it really is reference and master data, and they are a little bit different and importantly different as well. Talk about the importance of both of them, look at some specific building blocks, and finish up with some guiding principles and best practices. And then we'll get to the best part, which is talking to you guys about questions and things that you have. So jumping in, again, our perceived state of data in most cases is that organizations sort of think data is this thing that the business and IT kind of go back and forth about. And it's this sort of stuff that binds us. I like to call it the bat signal in the middle of it. Of course, it's really much more about letting them know that realistically data is something that they need to get a handle on, both IT and the business, and neither one of them can tame it. And in fact, if you really get interesting in the whole thing, this is really the way the world looks when we're sort of swimming in this enormous sea of data. So data management, given that context, is what happens between when data is found and when it is used, sources and uses in there. This gives us also some skill sets that we need to have that include data engineering, data storage, and data delivery methods. And we also need some governance around the process because, after all, you wouldn't want your sole non-depletable, non-degrading, durable strategic asset to be ungoverned or to be managed without any guidance, which means you need to have some specialized team skills. And if we draw a box around it like this, even that box doesn't really help us because it does not capture the most important aspect of data, which is its reuse. So if anybody has a better picture of what data management is, let's have it. This is the best we've been able to come up with in a number of years, and I guarantee you one of you has a better idea on this. Send it in. We will use it and give credit, of course, on all this. We've got a little bit more. We really do focus in on the resource end of things, and it does end up being that data management really pervades every part of the organization. And we need to have feedback that includes all of those loops all the way around. So given that type of a context here, what we have is the ability now to look specifically at what's going on in the data world. And the data world, interestingly enough, is a lot about hype and a lot less about the people and process sides of things. So when we look at the people and process sides of things, we see a very interesting similarity between that and Maslow's hierarchy of needs. As the hierarchy indicates, you start off with physiological needs, which means your food, clothing, and shelter. If you are hungry and you don't have a place to sleep, you are never going to be safe. If you're never safe, then you can't be part of something that is bigger than yourself. If you can't be part of something that's bigger than yourself, it's really hard to know how you fit into that whole process. And of course, lastly, what Maslow wanted us all to get to was self-actualization. Well, the reason for going through all of that is because the stuff in the data world is an awful lot like that. These advanced data practices I liken to the self-actualization. And there's some good ones. MDM, mining, we're talking about that today. But that's just the tip of the iceberg in terms of what's actually out there in the data world. The data world is much, much bigger than that. And what we really need to do is look at these foundational practices that really support the rest of it. And yet what we see happen over and over again is that organizations spend too much trying to self-actualize before they've actually learned how to be safe, how to belong to something larger, and how to get to the self-esteem stages of that. Now, the reason for that is because it's pretty easy in today's world to sell technologies. And that's what these things are. They are technologies. They are good technologies. But technologies always have an economic incentive behind them. We'll keep that for a future webinar to talk about. But what we really need to look at is organizational capabilities. And MDM falls into exactly that set of categories, as you'll see in just a minute. Now, everybody says, okay, great, Peter, I know it takes longer and all that sort of thing, but what I really need to do is I need to have it done by Friday. And can you do it faster? And the answer is yes, we can do it faster, but if we do it faster, it will take longer, it will cost more, it will deliver less, and it will present greater risk than instead if we learn to crawl, walk, and run our way up to the top of the pyramid. Similarly, we talk about a maturing process for data management that's built around the CMMI model in there, and we have a webinar on that coming up, I think, in May, Shannon, that we'll be able to do. And the CMMI model says there are some specific content areas around this. The idea, if you have a strategy, you're managing your data more coherently than if you don't have a strategy. The governance, again, is this ability to talk about a professional class of asset managers that we've now trained over the past couple of years to do this. We now have lifecycle management. We talk about quality and understanding. Fit for purpose is our primary driver there. Finally, we need to do it with the right processes and the right technology in order to get it to work with, of course, the right supporting processes by management. Now, once again, this is the foundation. This is the bottom of the pyramid that I just showed you. So we would rate these things in the CMMI parlance of, if you have a pulse, you get 1. If your process is repeatable, if you can repeat it, it's a managed process, you get 2 points. If it is written down somewhere, it's defined, it's 3 points. If you measure things within what's going on in your operations, you get 4 points, and you get 5 points for optimizing those aspects of what's going on. So I'm going to do a quick little exercise here where I'm going to rate each of these things here. And in our rating scale for this hypothetical organization, they are 3s. They're pretty darn good all the way around, with the exception of they don't have a good data management strategy. And the point is that the foundation is only as strong as the weakest link. Consequently, they can put literally hundreds of millions of dollars into data quality, and it will not help more than if they had done taking the 1 in the data strategy area and bringing it up to a 3 first before you get on with the rest of these. Now, the DIMBOK, some of you are familiar with this. DAMA's had it out since 2009, so it's 10 years old at this point. We have a second version out on it, but I like this particular articulation of it here because it shows reference and master data and then gives some examples: external codes, internal codes, customer data, product data, dimension management. We'll talk about all of those things as we go forward. And the old DIMBOK used to have a nice summary card for it, so we give you one of these here as well. It again shows basically what we're going to cover in the webinar, but more importantly, it shows how it all fits together. You've got some inputs, some activities, and some deliverables that pop out the other side, along with some technologies in the process. So the last thing I want to mention just in this little warm-up section here is that many of you can get certified in some of these areas, and our CDMP exam at DAMA is going to be offered at Enterprise Data World just in a couple of weeks, where Shannon and I will both be there for most of the week, and looking forward to seeing all of you guys in person. So, data management overview, let's dive into what you're really interested in, which is reference and master data management. I'm going to start out by telling you a quick little story. Now, the story is a company. It may sound kind of like yours in some cases. It's kind of fun. I do a lot of these things, and people will come up to me and go, "Oh, man, you really nailed our organization there." Well, I hope this isn't your organization. But they went out and bought a master data management technology. No problem. The stuff works. But after a year, as I'm walking the halls of this organization, I would hear things like, "Well, I didn't know really where to stick the data, so I stuck it in the MDM." Now, when you hear that, you know you've got a problem. And what it shows is just what I was talking about a second ago, an over-reliance on a one-legged stool. In this case, a technology focus where we need at least 3 legs on that stool in order to get it to work correctly. Now, the business took a look at this and said, okay, I guess we didn't do it right the first time. Let's do some diagnostics here. All right, so they take a quick look and they say, yeah, we better restart this thing because it's not going to work. So we'll prop that stool back up. And when we did an analysis, there was a general consensus that there needed to be some higher quality data in the master data management solution. And so the response from management was, well, get on it. Again, have it done by Friday. Get data qualitying. I know that's not really a word, but once again, they went out and bought a data quality solution with inexperienced data management practices. They just really didn't get anything right in this one. So the point is, we don't want your organization to show up like this, because with everything in technology, we've got this wonderful way of describing it. Bad data and something awesome still gives you bad results. And I've started using this a lot more as an icon to sort of represent most of the things that are happening out there in the world. The MDM is the awesome thing, but filling it full of bad data is not going to help. So let's talk about what it is. First of all, if you're on this call, welcome to the data world. If you're not on this call, you think MDM is mobile device management. Again, we got to watch our acronyms and be careful how we're talking to people about it. But let's look at it from a master data management perspective, and remember references rolled into there as well. MDM is not a thing. It's a discipline or a strategy, and that's important. It's where business and the IT get together and say some of the data is more important than others, and I'll show you why that is. Master and reference data provide context for your organization's transactions, and that's critical. But because it's sold as a technology solution, it's also sold as a silver bullet solution. Everything will be fine, wonderful, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, we know the only silver bullet is that there is no silver bullet, Clive. I know you're still listening occasionally out there, and I thank you for that advice. It has kept me well over the years. So in master data, what you're attempting to discover and define and manage is the official, consistent set of identifiers that are in your organization. These would be identifiers that allow people to identify customers, prospects, individuals, business partners, competitors. In fact, one of the more important results, a remediation that occurred after the 2007 recession, was that a couple of colleagues of mine got together and created something new called Legal Entity Identifier. That's going to help prevent the next oopsie, because when things went bad in 2007, we didn't know what a definition of an Irish bank was, just to pick one example of these things. So the identifiers of parties, the identifiers of places. It is absolutely critical in many cases that you be able to identify specific places accurately so that the entire company is literally singing off the same sheet of music, and of course specific things. So persons, places, and things are your entities that are managed by master data. And the goal of this is to come to what we've adopted from software as the golden version. Now, in the golden version, what that means is that it's the final product that is shipped and put on CD-ROMs. Of course, we know with online streaming and downloading today, you don't need to have a final version. You can just do in-stream updates. But nevertheless, when a recording artist or somebody's putting out a body of work that's going to be reproduced, they want to have that golden master in there. And that will give you something that allows others to look at as a standard. In data management, it's the data value that represents the correct answer to the business question. So in other words, we don't want to say things like if sales are up or down, depending on who you talk to. That's not a good answer. There should be one answer where you definitively log sales and how they actually accrue to things in there. So the definition is that these are planning, implementation, and control activities to ensure consistency with the golden values around these areas. Now, this control extends in two particular domains. The first one is reference data management. These are the control over the defined domain values, the vocabularies that we're standardizing in our organization here. And I'll give you a quick little example of all of this. One of the places I like to start working with organizations is that most people say, well, let's start with customer. Now, first of all, customer is the worst thing to pick, but that doesn't stop most people from doing it. And the reason it's a problem is because customer is a ill-defined term. It's the wrong level of abstraction. So if I'm working with your organization, you can ask me, and I have a little red Nerf ball that I carry with me, and I will throw it at anybody that uses the term customer. Why? Because it doesn't mean anything. It is not at the right level of abstraction. In order to do it, for example, you might want to consider the difference between current customers and potential customers. And the nice thing about this is we're going to build a quick little hierarchy or taxonomy here of what types of customers we have. So we probably treat our current customers different from our potential customers. Just as an example, you probably don't want to tell customers that bought something yesterday that it's going to be on sale tomorrow. Just not generally considered to be a good business practice. And this is a nice way of introducing this because management can follow it up to this point. And that works great until you get to the thing of saying, well, it's easy, right? No, none of this stuff is easy. For example, if you want to toss in the concept of an ex-customer, that could be a little bit of a problem. Where would that fit? Or maybe what you're deciding is that you need to have a difference between residential customers and commercial customers. Or another one, maybe you want to throw a VIP customer in there. So these are things that have to be carefully thought through in order to make this work. Now, from a reference data perspective, this is the data that is used, that are the allowable values in the database where people use them. So, for example, if you have an order status, you might have only couple of values: new order status, in progress order status, closed order status, or canceled order status. Anything else from that doesn't fall into the world that they understand. We have worked with organizations that don't have any ability to have a status in progress, right? Well, that depends on what your business practices are. So you'll see things called reference data sets around, and these would be the allowable values that you use in the reference context here. We may say US for United States and GB for the United Kingdom, although I can't tell you how many times I've gone into companies and they're actually calling it UK, right? Well, it makes a difference. If you want to get all the customers in the United Kingdom and you use UK, you'll probably get some of them, but if you want to get all of them, you should get UK and GB if they don't manage their master data well. If they manage their master data well, they'll tell you, yes, we use this one or that one, and we can definitely get a hold of everybody. So that's what we mean for reference data. These are the database values, but if you're not allowed in the database, it doesn't actually happen. Similarly, then, master data management gives you this idea of controlling the master values. You enable consistent shared contextual use across all systems. And this is motherhood and apple pie. Of course, this is what we want to have. Data about the business entities that provide context for the transactions, but in this case are not limited to the predefined values that we have within the reference data space. These business rules for the organization dictate the format, and they also dictate the allowable ranges for, again, the parties, the locations that are provided in there. They provide this context for the transactions, and this comes from the term master file. Now, most of you are too young to know this, but in the old days, we used to do this sort of master data stuff in this fashion. We might start out with a transaction where I had a balance in my checking account of $100, and I might have during the day a sandwich that cost $5. And at night, in the old days, they would run an update program, would take the transactions and run them against the master file, see where we get the term master data from, leaving me with a balance the next day of $95. And if that doesn't work right, then I need some error messages as well. So this is the idea of these master files staying in place. Let me give you a second example real quickly on this one as well. This is a allowable set of values that were on a particular project that we did. They had 9 values that they allowed for gender code. In fact, they were mandated by Canadian law, so these were the ones they had to maintain. Now, the reference data, again, these are the allowable database values, were that in Canada you needed to make sure that your gender codes had all 9 of these values that were allowable. So somebody could say, I don't know what their gender is, or that they were male, soon to be female. The master data then would be the fact that one of your customers has a particular value in that. I find that a particularly useful example. Hopefully it's clear to you guys. If it's not, of course, that's what the questions are for at the end of the semester. Boy, listen to me. The end of the hour here. Anyway, both of these reference and master data items, of course, provide context for that transactional data. So let's now talk about the importance of these concepts here. There's a bunch of different data facts, but pretty generally poor quality reference data continues to create major problem for financial institutions as well as many others. Too many firms still maintain the data locally in homegrown solutions. This is a problem, and it provides an important source of risk. So one of the things that's kind of fun about the work that we do is that we get in to work for the risk management people who have a very different perspective on the organization than perhaps some of the other executives in there. And of course, with new and changing regulatory environments, many more organizations are thinking twice about the whole process. Now, when you're doing master data management or anything that we would consider to be strategic in the organization, a good way to start thinking about them is thinking in terms of 3. Just as we need 3 legs on a stool to stand up, we also need 3 things to go on. So while many organizations will take a look at this and say, hey, I've got some reference data I want to deal with, trying to do it just by reference data really doesn't work. I'm going to put that slide back up there again. Because the key is we've almost never seen reference data work without accompanying data governance and data quality components, because these 3 are interdependent. So again, advice here, if somebody is doing master data without also considering governance and quality at the same time, it's going to be a problem. Data governance is what makes the case and is responsible for making sure that quality is implemented. Quality is a necessary but insufficient prerequisite. And of course, the MDM capabilities constrain the governance effectiveness all the way around. This interdependency is not something that most people are familiar with. So again, we've helped a lot of organizations out of problems that just have an issue where they've put in a master data management solution, but they haven't figured out the rest of this stuff yet, and they're wondering why things aren't getting better. Excuse me. So I'm going to tell you a quick story of another use of master data in a particular engagement. This was an engagement with a financial organization that was very much interested in reaching out and reconnecting with people. It had not talked to them for a while. We have these systems of record is what they call their master data, but you can see how it works within this context here. When we would parse through the master data. We could look and see when that customer had last had a touch point with the financial organization. Oh, Peter, we haven't talked to you for 2 years, right? That's a good piece of information. Now, what do I do with that from the master data? Well, we built a little quick repository that was right out there on the channel servers so that it could go out there and say, if we have a customer and they haven't talked to us for a while, let's just say I'm making an ATM withdrawal at a bank, it says, hey, Peter, if you haven't talked to us for a while, if you'd come inside and update your records and give us some more of your information so we can serve you better as a financial institution, we'll give you a toaster, or whatever the particular piece was. And that, relatively speaking, goes back into the contact situation, which allows us to update the addresses and, again, get better quality information about how recently we have talked to our customers. The architecture that we just put together for this was so robust that we were able to go out and add the external address validation processing into this as well. Again, it's a fairly complex diagram here, but you can see that the master data was an important part of the solution. Here's another similar kind of project showing, again, just the interdependencies here. In this case, the organization was interested in knowledge management. Once again, they couldn't do it without quality, so it was knowledge management, data quality, and master data in this case. And once again, you can see that the master data was a highly dependent part of the solution in order to make this work. Finally, a third example here. Again, I don't expect you to find these things useful directly to yourself, but you can see how the master data becomes a larger part of almost any major data management initiative or business initiative in there if it doesn't already exist. And the reason for that is pretty straightforward. As we were building thid systems, we did what we call paving the cow paths. So we made a payroll application, we made a finance app, we made a marketing. This was before ERPs and things like that. And there's still lots of companies out there that haven't gone into the ERP world, but what it meant was that each of them had their own separate piles of data that were unintegrated and more likely unintegratable unless you did what we call point-to-point mapping. So connecting each of these pieces up with everything else, it just gets to be very, very complex, very, very quickly, and very, very expensive to manage on that. So paving the cow path leads to this real set of interesting problems that we have in the organization. I'm going to move to another example here, which is a tank-related example. Now, first of all, what type of tank are we talking about? Well, in this case, it was a company that sells chemical products or petroleum products, things of this type of nature. And you would put this chemical in the tank to take it with you. The ERP, the accounting package that they were looking at as an ERP, considered that any time you moved a product from one tank to another tank, it counted as a retail sale. These are three examples of transactions that would involve retail sales. Putting it into a portable gas can, putting it into a tank of an automobile, or putting it into, in this case, a farm use type of context. But there are some non-retail sales. Putting it into a portable tanker or a permanent storage tank or a semi-permanent storage tank or a floating tank or a flying tank. All of these things would not count as retail sales for this organization. So the way they solved their problem was not to go in and modify the accounting package, which would have cost them a lot of money, but instead their accounting department adopted the controlled vocabulary with an accompanying taxonomy that I showed you before, like customers. In this case, nobody in this organization is allowed to say tank. They must always fully qualify the use of tank. So it's very clear what they're talking about, whether it's a retail tank or a wholesale tank or its internal context tank. So these master data items are just absolutely critical to have when you are attempting to work your way through the various types of things that organizations hit. We tend to offer organizations advice around these areas, which is to say, let's ease yourself into the practice of building master data management solutions as opposed to jumping in and spending lots of money on them quickly. First of all, the longer you postpone technology, the cheaper it will be. It's just a wonderful golden rule that we call Gordon Moore's Law, and it tends to work very broadly in most technology instances on this. So technology is really the last thing you should buy. What you should do is solve the problem, as we did here, of saying we're going to use a controlled vocabulary approach to this instead of modifying the ERP, because we think our accounting professionals can in fact handle the use of a controlled vocabulary. It's a pretty easy thing to do, by the way. It's a lot cheaper than going in and modifying the software that you have. Of course, you also don't want to get confused between this kind of tank either. That's a very different type of a tank and has a very different use and probably won't work well with their accounting system. So reference and master data is about vocabulary and making sure that you're using the vocabulary the way it should be. Now, when we see this, we'll take a look at something that's going to look, these next 3 slides will be pretty similar. There are little subtle differences in there, but first of all, we're going to start out with a business data steward. So somebody we've got in the organization whose job it is to help make data available as an organizational asset. That is the role of the stewards. They work with something called a codes management system. Now, the reason it's a code management system is, remember, reference data is all about the database codes, the allowable values that are in the database that the organization uses, and that's why we call it a code management system, which controls the codes that are used throughout the organization. So if, for example, I have an older system and I only have 2 gender values of male or female in the system, and I want to work in Canada, and Canadian law requires you to have 9 values, and the code management system would be updated to expand from 2 values to 9 values, and the organization may or may not go back and actually update the master data items of the value of those to each one. Sometimes it's good enough to offer them. Sometimes you actually have to go back and put them in place. Now, what's happening in the next piece of this is that on some sort of a controlled configuration management controlled piece, you would release these new codes into the reference databases that we have here. And these reference databases are where we populate the rest of this. The online transaction systems, the databases that are there, the data warehouse, all of these things would then get the new volume. And let's just pretend that Facebook takes over the world and now mandates all 63 gender values that Facebook maintains about people. Well, you'd have to come back and repeat this process again. We'd go back and we'd have the business stewards take them from 9 values. We used to be 2, now it's 9, now we're 63. We'd still do exactly the same thing. Controlled environment, add them to the reference system of record, control the push out to the rest of the systems that we have within this context. That's how it works from a reference data architecture perspective. Oh, we might want to get other data stuff too in from the outside. Yes, that's always sort of an afterthought, but nevertheless still very, very valuable in there. Now, the same general architecture works, but you don't have nearly as much control over your master data. In this case, the master data does get the system of record, and there is a master place for it. So it shouldn't be a question that you're asking anymore, where are these packages? Where do I go and find the customer information? Let me just give you one statistic too. I forgot to do this earlier, but the average organization maintains its customer data across 13 separate systems. I can calculate actually how inefficient that is for your organization. Most people are pretty scared to hear the number along those lines. If you don't have this type of a articulated process to put through, it's very, very difficult to actually keep control of this. And what happens is you have thousands of little tiny data factories, as Tom Redman calls them, hidden data factories in your organization that are doing the correction work, whereas instead if you had this architecture, you would have a much, much better approach to the entire piece. And of course, if you want to put both of them together, you can do the same kind of updating with a reference and master data architecture, which is why we talk about them in general in the same area. Now, there's lots and lots of failure problems that are associated with this. I'm not going to read all of these things to you, but the general piece on all of this is that MDM is as failure prone as any IT project, which means it has a 1 in 3 chance of succeeding with full functionality for the cost that it was supposed to be within the schedule that was provided. That's not good. I keep telling people if my dentist was that bad, I would absolutely find a new dentist. Again, lots and lots of these numbers that are problematic in terms of this. The real idea, though, is that most organizations do not do a good job the first time through this. They have all kinds of failure rates, which are ineffective leadership, implemented as a technology project. They think the MDM is actually the EDW. That would be the Enterprise Data Warehouse as opposed to Enterprise Data World, or it's an ERP, that they think it's an IT effort, that it's done separately from governance and quality, that the initiatives are implemented with inappropriate technologies, or that you have simply some internal politics or siloed mentality. Culture is the more difficult aspect of many of these things, and it is a problem if we're not going to deal with culture at the same time as we're dealing with the rest of these. The other cause of failure, though, that doesn't show up on these statistics is failure to understand your existing business architecture, and specifically your business process architecture. I find that only 1 in 10 companies actually maintains a formal business process architecture, which almost always dooms your MDM effort to a real problem. Now, why would I have to know that? Well, I'll show you in just a minute, but let me give you a little quick side deviation into how you figure out what your business process is. Wonderful company out of Europe called QPR, and several others, but QPR really invented the technology here, of going in and reading log files from your existing systems so that they can go through and approximate your existing business practices. It's an amazing set of technologies. We've used it for a number of different clients, and it is just super, super helpful. The idea is, no, you don't need to go in and map out all of your processes, but for certain processes, it is really crucial to understand how MDM supports those existing business practices. And having access to something like this really makes a difference. Let me show you how much of a difference it makes. We tried for years and years to figure out how to do car and truck engines better. Well, we haven't really got the truck part of it right, but we're doing okay with the car. The traditional engine, of course, is a gas-powered engine. And here's where everybody made the mistake. They kept trying to replace the gas-powered engine until Toyota came along and came up with something called the hybrid engine. Now, it's completely counterintuitive when you first start to think about it. I'm going to put 2 engines in my car to save energy? Well, turns out they did a pretty darn good job because they were looking at the right level of granularity. The wrong level of granularity is replace the engine with something else. In this case, you would not have the ability to, I either have an electric engine or I have a gas engine. Toyota's brilliance in this was to put the 2 of them together. And let me show you how they work if you haven't been in a hybrid car. Of course, you probably have. The thing on the lower left is somebody's foot. It's not mine, but mine does exactly the same thing as these do. So you'll notice the electric motor is driving the car sometimes, and the gas motor is driving the car sometimes. Sometimes they're both doing it. And you know what? The driver doesn't have to worry about a thing. In this case, Toyota Smarts takes care of the whole thing, and this problem was solved. Now, we're not done with solving the combustion engine, don't get me wrong, but this is a very important step forward. So important, of course, that you've seen all of the other car manufacturers copy the Toyota hybrid design on this. So what we have here is we've changed the level of granularity. The original level of granularity from the process architecture was either a gas engine or an electric motor. Toyota, by putting them both in the same vehicle, allows us to go back in and achieve much better gasoline mileage. Of course, don't look at the thing on the right. It's no way you're going to get 90 miles per gallon everywhere you go, but you do get better gas mileage in the hybrids for the most part on this. And this is why it's critical. If you have a very good system that is delivering correct data, you've done a good job of data quality, and you've included governance around your process, and yet it still doesn't deliver the data in the timeliness that the business practices need to have it. And it's not always a time issue. Sometimes it's a chunking issue or a size issue, or sometimes different quality issues that are in there as well. You've got to make sure that you match that. So you'll see a lot of organizations that put a lot of effort into understanding their various business practices in this. It is critical to understand that MDM, reference and master data management, cannot work well for your organization as long as you do not fully understand how they are interacting with your business process architecture. This is a wonderful diagram showing somebody's final version of this. I don't expect this to be yours, but it does give you a good idea of the level of sophistication that you need to have. So it's an important technology, but at the same time, it is something that we need to pay some very careful attention to. Certain things that most people don't tend to think are ways of describing or considerations that should come up in the master data management world. So let's dive into a couple of specific building blocks around this. First of all, we'll talk about goals and principles. Again, if you're not using SMART goals, shame on you. That's old enough at this point that you should do it. The idea is you should provide authoritative source of reconciled, high-quality master and reference data. But here's the catch. Don't try and do it for everything all at once. That's what everybody will try to get you to do because they think it's a project. Again, it's a program, it's a strategy, it's an approach, it's not a technology. So pick a small area. Working with a healthcare company that we've been working with for a couple of years, and they were having trouble keeping track of their doctors. And of course, they'd been told by the big consultants, yes, you need some master data management tools. Here's, the 7-figure investment that you can make. And of course, the hospital choked on that. That's a fairly expensive component in there. So what they did is they came to us and we said, look, let's just take one piece that's giving you a lot of trouble. You're having trouble managing your master list of physicians for this organization. So build yourself a small little master data management stack. Okay, technology stack using SQL Server. I'm not making a Microsoft commercial. Everybody has good SQL Server resources in their organization who could, if you ask them, build you a stack of technology, a database technology that will simply keep track of the physicians that we're trying to keep track of in this organization. By doing this for the past 3 years, this organization has saved many millions of dollars. They have been able to use just this homegrown approach to be able to reuse and lever standards in their existing process. And they're now starting to move this into business intelligence and other types of information integration efforts in the organization. And after 3 years, they're now thinking they're probably ready to have a conversation with people about the master data management solutions that are available to them. However, now they have a working solution that works well with their integrated existing business process architecture, and they can now look at the MDM solutions that are proposed by the vendors to see if they are better than the solution that they currently have, which they've already paid for, has already produced a return on investment, and maybe in a couple of months I'll actually get a chance to look and see what their decision was. Sounds like a much better way of approaching things than the way we've traditionally seen. I think the worst one that I think I ever saw was a colleague and I were working at one place, and they literally were 3 plane loads of consultants were flown in every week to work on this MDM effort. And just like the story that I started out with at the beginning of the hour for you all, they were very much going after the end of all of this, oh my goodness, I don't know where the data is, so I stuck it in the MDM. Problematic all the way around. So, next piece on all this, let's talk about some specific activities. And the idea here is you need to understand master and reference data needs. Remember, they are different. Reference is much more technical. Master is much broadly focused on the business. But if you don't understand what those needs are, so it makes good sense to spend a couple of weeks running around the organization and finding out areas, in the case of this organization that I was describing to you a minute ago, where having the wrong doctor information caused problems. Okay, so they did a good job on the requirements. Then they went and identified master and reference data sources. Where do we have information about Dr. Sword? Where do people go and access it? How can we look at the processes that are feeding this, such as the onboarding process when we bring a new doctor on? I have a student in class, as a little side reference on the whole thing, whose first name, according to the university, is FNU, F-N-U. And I said, oh, what type part of the world is that a name like FNU? I've never heard that before. It's kind of cute. Of course, I knew the answer, and she did too. She said, well, no, actually it means first name unknown, but now I'm going to be known around the university as FNU. Very, very big problem. All right, next thing. You need to have the architecture. And I've showed you a couple of architectural diagrams. It's going to be a variation on that. The reason it's going to be a variation on those diagrams I showed you before is because you're going to bring your legacy systems on, hopefully one at a time in a gradual evolving fashion as opposed to a big bang switchover. Almost never seen those work in 35 years, but give it a try if you want to try and beat the odds on that. But you need to be able to implement some of these solutions. So as I was mentioning before, the healthcare organization did not put this thing out there for everybody to do. They did a little bit. The first year they only had a few customers of their master data. Next year they got better at it. They added a few more. By the end of the third year, they estimated they had already covered about 2/3 of the organizational needs in that master data area. So implementing it in little bit and pieces as opposed to a big bang approach. Again, look at specific match rules. How is it that you go in and do this? I've seen a lot of people, for example, take HubSpot and throw things into HubSpot, where HubSpot will go out and search the web and try and find things that match up with it. Again, things like that can be a very good way of doing it. But what you really need to understand is what are the rules for processing, again, physicians in this case. Obviously, the next thing they're going to add to that are more associates at the healthcare organization. So they may go specialist, or they may go actually out to the general clerk staff around there as well. You need to establish the golden records. All right, so now we've decided what we're going to do. What does a doctor record look like? When I'm working with organizations, the one thing that I tell them that it is very clear that they've got to have for each phase of the project, they have to have an absolute objective way of determining whether something is master data or not. Now, you might go back and say, well, it's anything that's a person, place, or thing, right? Well, no, you really don't want to do that, because that's a never-ending project. Google will probably accomplish it in their lifetime by labeling everything. I don't know if you've seen some of these pieces now, but Google actually has master lists of buildings around the world and people that go in and out of those buildings. You're thinking, how did they get all that from search? Oh, they've got ways. Again, separate conversation for it. But getting these golden records together so that we have now physicians' information, and it doesn't have to be perfect, but it has to be of known quality so that we know where we're going with these things. Then, as I mentioned before, you need to define and maintain those hierarchies and whatever affiliations that you have between the various hierarchies that are there. Don't implement it as a customer master data piece. Implement it as a customer master data piece with types, if that's the case that you're going to maintain different types of customers. Most organizations do. That's why it's a really good best practice to do that. Then test your system out by implementing a new source of master data in there. Bring something new in once you've got something working. You don't need to stop. We can just keep working our way on up the ladder and getting more and more of it in there. But if you don't have an objective way of determining, and in this case for this healthcare organization, if you were a physician with admitting privileges at the hospital, that was their definition for it, then you were part of this first rollout of master data management that they were working with. So as you bring in next sources, if the hospital merges, buys another hospital coming in, gee, that never happens in the healthcare world, now you know how to integrate that information within your existing sources. You do need ways of propagating these lists out to make certain that all your developers implement their databases with the right reference the reference data that's in there, that all the master data gets to the right processes in there. And as mentioned before, you've got to have a very good configuration management process in there. If you don't, you'll end up with things that are inconsistent. Again, you've probably seen this on some of the online services where it says, well, it's going to take me a few minutes to update all the records here, so just be patient. You're not going to have excellent results for a few minutes in this. You got to get a little deeper on some of these and go down and say, well, who needs what information? Best tool for that with your business process architecture is something we call a CRUD matrix. CRUD stands for create, read, update, or delete. What you want to do is reference which business processes create the data, which business processes update the data, which business processes delete them, and make sure they then occur in the right order. You don't want to delete something before you update it. It sounds silly, but I've seen it happen in many, many cases. Also, controlling the access to different data sources. So different business systems will need access to different parts of your master data, and they should be, again, also rolled out in a nice phased implementation. Again, big bang, we're just not seeing work out there. How does this data differ for the other data sources? What's the difference between handling a physician's data and a nurse's data, or a physician's assistant data? There are some significant differences. Of course, we want to make sure that we handle them appropriately. If we do find there are inconsistencies, then we throw that back into the data governance process and say, hey, data governance, we need some assistance with this, figuring out what is the best way to govern this particular data, reconcile the inconsistencies there, and then finally we've got some valid values that we want to make sure that we have in there as well. When we know something is good, I like to do it in a way that says, look, if you're moving to cloud or moving from one system to another, put the data in the new system that's been cleaned. Don't put the dirty data in the system. And yet time after time, this technology-first approach builds the data warehouse, spends all the money, nothing left over for training, and oh, by the way, we're going to forklift the existing data into the new system. Well, if you forklift anything into an MDM system, it is a recipe for disaster. People are told that the MDM has better data in it, and therefore, if you show them that it has poor quality data, but we're going to clean it up later on, they will not lose faith in the data, they will lose faith in the MDM solution. The deliverables that come out of an exercise like this are a whole bunch of cleansing that you need to have, understanding good requirements for your reference and master data, and they will not change a lot. They will evolve, but they will not make radical shifts. So consequently, those requirements are well worth preserving as organizational knowledge. Of course, there'll be some data models and documentation. This will then give us some pieces of reliable reference and master data that we can start to push to some parts of the organization and get people with the idea that you shouldn't be just pulling data randomly from systems. You should be finding specific data from specific systems based on data quality measures and reports that are there. There's a whole cast of characters that come into play on all of this. You've got all kinds of suppliers where you've got a steering committee, you've got some business data stewards, subject matter experts, data consumers that are all in there, and of course, let's use the standards organizations and data providers in a way that's reasonably appropriate there. You're also going to have, however, a consumers of the data, which is the application end users, whatever BI reporting that you have, application developers, architects, data integration development components, the vendors that are doing the BI and customer types of activities, lots more on each of these. And you've got people that are working with them, the stewards, the subject matter experts. The architects are going to be needed at the beginning of the project. One thing it's very difficult to do is architect after you've implemented in there. Of course, some data analysis in there, maybe some data science, architecture, engineering, a governance council, different data providers that are coming up, and other IT professionals that are all interacting with these systems. From a technology perspective, hopefully you're getting an idea here. This is not rocket science. Don't get me wrong, there are some very sophisticated systems. But I ask you, would you take your 16-year-old driver that has never driven on snow and hand them the fob to your brand new Tesla and say, go ahead and drive in a foot of snow, Tesla can handle it? Again, they're not mature enough to do this. This is why we recommend build your own kind of a process. So, of course, ETL is going to be a wonderful source of metadata. By the way, that bit about mining the existing data logs to get your business processes, your ETL is another wonderful source of metadata that most organizations overlook. An ETL job runs a lot because it does the right thing. Therefore, the data that's out there is probably the right stuff. Again, there are reference data management applications. There are master data management applications. There are reference and master data management applications that you can purchase, but buy them last. Do the work, do the analysis work, find out what it is you need to have in your organization and gradually adopt these things. A good master data management solution should be looked at as having a shelf life of decades. It's worth easing into the process. Of course, I've mentioned several times already, process modeling tools are absolutely crucial for all of this as well. Yeah, probably some semblance of metadata repository. By the way, that's spelled wrong. I should not have put a dash in that. I'm sure it's left over from a cut and paste. We do not use a dash in metadata anymore. But of course, you can tell from what we've been talking about, reference and master data is an awful lot integrated with your existing metadata repository practices. If you're not familiar with data profiling tools, we're going to talk about them a little bit more next webinar, which will be the April webinar. We're going to talk about approaching data management technologies, and profiling tools are a tool I had a little bit of a hand in helping to create. And I'll tell you that story in a month on that. But it's a very interesting technology. I wouldn't say they're new, but it's 10 years or actually 15 years at this point. But most people are not using them, so it's new to most people. Again, profiling is different from cleansing. They can be related. Many of the tools are integrating these two functions, but the profiling tool allows you to do the analysis work to understand your architecture that's being proposed and whether your proposed architecture for master and reference data will in fact satisfy the needs that you've already established in that area. Again, some data integration technology, business rule engines, and again, can't say it enough, you've got to have good discipline around the change management process. If you do not, you will not succeed with this, because a fool with a tool is still a fool. One last section as we work our way back around to the top of the hour. We'll talk about some guiding principles, best practices on this area. It is important to make sure that people understand that shared reference and master data belongs to the organization, that it is an organization-wide resource, that it is not something that somebody owns. It will be governed and managed hopefully by your governance group. If you don't have a governance group, again, good luck with getting master data to work in these areas. But it is a shared resource that belongs to the organization, or to a part of an organization if you're subdividing the process. Again, it's an ongoing data quality improvement program. There are regular processes and things that you can use to check and continuously improve your reference and master data. One of the happiest days I can remember was an organization came up with a cool new algorithm that would help improve the quality of their master data, because they figured out a correlation between two existing data items, and they added that in as the rule, and their quality of their metadata, their master data, was improved at a significant level. You've got to have the people and process portions of this as well. The people portion of the process are the business data stewards, who are accountable for making sure that these are going to work in the correct area. That those golden values do represent the best source. You don't want people to use it just because you tell them to use it. You want them to use it because it represents the best value for the organization moving forward. And only replicate data out of those existing master sources when you're doing this, because of that change management process. Finally, last part of this, active involved executive sponsorship, but that's true for anything. So we need to say it, and if you don't have somebody that's going to be actively in charge of it, then it's unlikely that your master data management initiative will succeed. That the business should own the data governance process, not IT. The business are the only ones who can assign value and therefore priorities in terms of where these should go. You've got to have strong project management and organizational change management. I know a lot of groups that are really good with project, but I don't know as many groups that are good with organizational change management. Should be something that you should pay attention to. Use a holistic approach. Again, people, process, and technologies. But I'm telling you, I see this the vast majority of the time where people look at MDM and say, I bought one, and that takes care of my problem. Well, they can't tell you where to drive or what to do. You are the ones who can best do this for the organization, so it's got to be a holistic approach. Your processes have to be ongoing, repeatable, and supporting continuous improvement. When you have a well-defined business process, you can define controls into that process much more easily than you can trying to nail Jell-O against the wall. It's really critical to make sure that you understand data management needs to understand the reference of dedicated support of professionals, that your hub, which is what you're creating, how it works. They are different. They have strengths and weaknesses. That's good. It gives you lots of choices. That's why building your own makes a lot more sense than, in fact, starting out by buying a large one from another company. Again, resist the urge to customize if you do buy one, because they are all going to be manufactured in ways that are not perfect for your organization, and you should make the trade-offs between whether I change my existing processes or whether I need to customize the system. I had one organization that worked where they had so much master data that they felt that they needed to have 100 times more than the next company that was near them. This is where good idea to compare yourself against your peers is a real good thing. We said, really, you really want to be 100 times more capable than everybody else? I think, if you did 10 times, you'd be doing really well. But 100 times, they'd spent lots of money customizing the products that were there. Obviously, make sure that you stay patches are up. And most importantly, as you're rolling this thing out, make sure that people understand it is a test and that you're going to be working with this in the testing area in a couple of different ways to make sure that everybody is able to get through these. So again, a couple of quick takeaways on this. I'm just going to not read them out here to you. There's 15 of them. I'll put them up here on the board. What I do want to do is take the last minute here and show you one of the best ways of implementing this stuff that I've ever seen. I say implementing, it's an articulation of how it was done. So this is an example from British Telecom. And I want you to imagine getting an email from the boss. We'll assume that it's been properly vetted, because you don't usually get an email from the boss, with the following little message attached to it. There we go. Now, Dave Evans told me we could have that, so I've put a link in there for you. When you get the slides, you can take a look at it yourself and see what it looks like. But it's a wonderful articulation where people really did have a good idea, everybody from top to bottom of the organization, and they could even name some of the piles. So what was going on there is that British Telecom was implementing master data, and they did a cute little ditty. It was 52 seconds, not a long piece. Cost them a couple £100 to have somebody do a little animation on it. It's a very good animation. I know it goes by really quick. That's why I put the link there so you can go look at it yourself on that. But what a wonderful articulation to have on that. Well worthwhile, because they could track the number of people who'd read it, and people could come back and name some of the 7 sisters, which were what they called their database. So we're at the top of the hour. Again, I apologize for the 3-minute delay getting started on this, but hopefully we'll see a lot of you all in a couple of weeks at Enterprise Data World. We've got a couple of sessions, how I learned to stop worrying and love my data warehouse. I can do that with my colleagues Mark Molnar and Glenn Carney, who love working with them. And then I've got another really fun one we're going to do called the Data Management Brain Drain. We're not sure if this is a problem or not, but come see Dave, Eddie, and I on Wednesday and see if that works out. Our April webinar, as I mentioned before, is Approaching Data Management Technologies, and the May webinar also mentioned is Data Management Maturity. And we're at the top of the hour, and it's time for Shannon to take back over. Miss Shannon, how are you?
Peter, thank you so much for another great presentation, and I'm so excited. I can't believe an EDW is next week. That is just crazy.
Friday.
I know. So diving right in here to answer the most commonly asked questions, just a reminder, I will send a follow-up email to all registrants by the end of day Thursday for this webinar with links to the slides and the recording and anything else requested throughout. And if you have questions, feel free to submit them in the bottom right-hand corner in the Q&A section. So, Peter, do you see data steward versus data curator aligned to a similar work role in the future?
Very definitely. Curators are something that have been around for quite a bit, and there's actually a good bit of science around them. One of the things we forget a lot of times is that there has been a group of dedicated professionals working in this area on some of the more pressing problems, and they are called library science professionals. Lots and lots of very good research and work in this area, and you ignore it really at your peril, because many of these problems have been solved. I know every company thinks they're absolutely unique and, we're different and nothing that's ever been done before could be helpful to us. Well, guess what? It's not true. It's one of the things you see after 35 years is that, man, there have been an awful lot of people that have had this type of problem before. So these curators have done a very, very good job for the most part. I venture to say that many people who use the term data curator don't really know what they're talking about, but there are a class of professionals out there and associated degree programs that do a great job on that. And so, yes, they should be incorporated into your governance initiatives.
So when a firm has multiple stewards across all the different organizations across the company and primarily working within their individual silos, creating their own quote-unquote vocabulary, what would you suggest to better collaborate such that we are fully consistent?
Well, of course, you're probably doing something that's working. Hang on, let me get to the slide I wanted to show on that one, which is the paving the cow path slide. There we go. You're not alone, of course, when you say this. There are many organizations, most organizations start out by doing this. And the idea is, we've got lots of complexity in our organization. By the way, if you only had 7 systems, as I'm showing here, that would be fabulous. In many cases, it's literally hundreds of systems. So an NBM solution is put out there as a way of helping to improve the overall effectiveness and efficiency of the organization function. And in this case, the ability of the organization to do that, they're typically going about and saying, okay, we'll just buy a ERP package or an MDM package and everything will get better. I would prefer if they were more honest and said things like, an MDM set of technologies absolutely is likely to be part of your solution package, but until we've done the analysis work of looking at your systems, there's no way that anybody can tell you the answer to this, other than you probably need to manage some of your master data better than you currently are managing it. And that's likely the case for almost everybody. So by starting out with this sort of build your own for a couple of years, you'll save the organization lots of money, and you'll be able to deliver concrete results. So in this instance here, for example, you may want to just simply do marketing. And it's not even the whole marketing data, but maybe some marketing master data that would go into that. And then look at how that marketing data would interact with the finance data. That's what's going to uncover the link that you need to have to get into your process architecture. Again, maybe extend it from there to manufacturing, because that's an area that you can achieve synergies by reducing the sand in the grits, if you will, which is sort of what bad data ends up being within your organization. But, what will probably happen to your organization is that somebody will be out on a golf course somewhere, or they'll read a magazine in the back of an airplane seat, and it'll say, hey, MDM's going to solve all your problems. Just buy one of these things, and it'll take care of it. Well, you will need the technology, but probably later. But more importantly, if you haven't done the analysis work that you need to have, there's no point in going and spending money on technology. People, process, and technology, that holistic approach. Really interesting question. Thank you for that.
So do you have any specific examples in clinical data management?
That I can talk about? No, catch me at EDW or a beer on the side, and I can tell you some stories. It's, if you will, it's the same type of problem, except that, of course, just like everything in healthcare, it's a lot more complicated. That said, however, it also makes sense to go in and look at these things through a master data management lens. In the old days, we called this all data administration and management, and that sort of covered a multitude of sins that were there. Nowadays, in the clinical environment, there are really good models that are out there. Oh, by the way, I should start off and tell a little bit about the modeling pieces. People like David Marco, Len Silverstone, myself, a couple other authors have published a number of predefined data models that are good starting places for them, good templates. Kind of like if you write a will, you can go online to onlinelawyer.org or whatever it's called and download a pro forma will. Right? It's not the perfect thing, but it's a good starting place. We've done a lot of service to the industry over the years by providing these base level data models, and there are clinical master data models that you can get a hold of on that if you need to take a look at them.
What are the specific steps for a mid-sized organization would need to take towards this?
So for a mid-sized organization, really what that says to me is it doesn't have a gigantic IT department. It's got an IT department that basically keeps things running, but is not, for example, expert in the intricacies of master data management technology. There are some very good books out there. I did include a couple of links at the end of this, so when you get the slides, you'll get some links to some reference material out there to take a look at. Again, obviously Enterprise Data World is a great place to go and get smart about it. So if you haven't got anything going on next week, come on out to Boston and join us out there. But get a little bit of education in there. And that's one of the wonderful things about Enterprise Data World is that you're going to have 1,000 people that'll be there talking about the same kinds of things. And it's perfectly good to grab people off the side or somebody who's just made a presentation and say, hey, tell me a little bit more. I want to know more about this. Or if you're really interested, you can put together a birds of a feather session where you say, hey, anybody that wants to talk about, again, let's do clinical master data management, you will probably find 3 or 4 other people up there that'll be very happy to speak with you about their experiences and what they're sharing. So a medium-sized organization has got an IT department that's not going to consider themselves expert in that area, and that's probably a good thing. By the way, there are some interesting cloud offerings in almost all of these as well that may or may not be appropriate for your organization, but certainly should at least be evaluated as part of the process. Again, remember how cloud was sold when it was initially sold. Cloud is cheaper because storage is free. Well, I've never seen a single person move to cloud and save money. That said, I've seen them improve service, and that's actually a good thing. So they're good things about cloud, cost is definitely not one of them. That said, though, again, instead of buying your own master data management solution, you can look at implementing some cloud-based components and see how they work for your organization as well. For the medium-sized company, it's, in some ways you're lucky because you're too small for the big consultancies of the world to come in and pay attention to you because you don't have that 7 figures that you want to put into it. But your need for integration is no less. And so it is absolutely crucial that you figure a way of moving your organization forward step by step according to a larger plan that will eventually take what I'm showing on the screen and turn it into something a little bit less messy.
So when you build your own, do you see that moving to a COTS product over time? Do you get pushback from IT that is seeking to standardize on a product set?
So there are very good reasons for buying commercial off-the-shelf software, or COTS software as we describe it, and the maintenance component is absolutely one of them. I would never suggest that the homegrown solution that I'm saying you start with will likely be your end. However, I have seen a half a dozen organizations over the past 10 years who have built their own and said, we went out and looked at the vendors, and we actually do it better than they do it for our organization. It's not that their product is wrong, it's that our needs are different. And when you build a standard product, you have to either conform to those standards, or worse still, you have to modify their code. We've already talked about that a little bit. Hopefully that answers that. Again, push back if it doesn't.
So I love this question. Have you ever seen an MDM developed in a NoSQL database?
So the key for NoSQL, remember, is that it means not only SQL, and that usually means that some people are still doing bits and pieces of it. But yes, there are absolutely big data, if you will, technologies that will help you to do this. You're going to have a little bit less of a market in that area. So anyway, short answer to the question is yes, but what they're typically called in the big data world is they're called identity management technologies, which is another level of abstraction higher up than MDM. But it's saying within the lake or whatever it is that you're looking at, wherever your pile of data is that you're being big about on it, that there needs to be some way of making sure that you can attach specific pieces to it, like I want that one, or I want to track these, or I need all of these type. And again, those are the kinds of things that you can do out of that type of an environment. And in many cases, it works out very well. What we tend to see in the big data environment, again, is just a lot more push for people to be out there and saying, oh boy, this is going to solve all of my problems. Again, I hate to keep sounding so old and pedantic about it, but in 35 years, I've never seen any technology go away. We add something to it because it's good and it adds some value to what we're doing. Even in this situation here, so this is my sort of favorite statistic of integration right at the moment. If you have 250 systems that currently are out there and somebody says we're going to replace them with one, the average is that you will replace half of those systems. So at the end of the exercise, instead of having one system where you once had 250, you will now have 125, but it's still an improvement. And you'll have a larger set of things in the middle that can now help you evaluate the rest of them. But virtually no time do I ever see all the systems get replaced with whatever the new system is. It just doesn't happen out there. We're always adding to our existing complexity in the technology environment. We very, very rarely subtract from it.
Love it. So so do you see SCD data implemented in MDM, example addresses?
I'm not sure what SCD stands for. If I drop my slides, I could Google it real quick, but maybe somebody can. Sorry?
SCD. S as in Sam, Charlie, David.
Data. Yeah, I don't know what that is. It's a new term for me. But
example is addresses. I'm not sure. Slowly changing dimensions. What they say. Yeah.
Okay, slowly changing dimensions. Well, that's exactly what you want. And think about it for a minute. Master data management is about taking some parts of your data environment that are real and exist and perfectly reasonable, and trying to get better on them. All right, so here's our example that we did earlier. Put it back up there. I'm not going to run you through the scenario again. But in this case, it's very clear what are the master data items in this case, the items that keep track of, in this case, the account balances and associated data that's with them in there. So those are the kinds of things that people need to be understanding. But this model, this diagram, this picture is literally, I think, from 1962. So these things have not changed. We've just said we can do certain things with certain parts of our data that will make the rest of our data management tasks easier, and that's an important component.
Perfect. And there's
silence.
Silence. Yeah, everyone's quiet. No more questions. I see comments
it's a
like
beautiful day here on the East Coast.
I see comments like slowly changing dimensions too keeps all history with end dates and if you want to add anything to that, but
yeah, slowly changing dimensions, absolutely, very reasonable. I hadn't actually ever heard it abbreviated like that, but that's cool, and that's exactly what you want. Those slower changing dimensions are more useful in a master data management context than they are in a transaction data context.
Yes, when we get in our own environments, we can speak in acronyms, can't we? And for sure.
There you go.
And so if you have any more questions, feel free to submit them in the bottom right-hand corner in the Q&A. And I just got another, just to answer the most commonly asked questions, again, I will send a follow-up email for this webinar by end of day Thursday with links to the slides and links to the recording of the presentation. And I think that's it. What another presentation, Peter, and I can't wait to see you and everybody in ADW next week. So excited.
Looking forward to it. Looking forward to seeing everybody. We're going to have a good event. We always come away super energized from these things, and it's part of the fun of being in this environment. Shannon, thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good one.
All right. We'll see you guys. See you in a week or see you in 3 weeks, right? Whatever it is.
Exactly.
Take care, everybody.
Everybody.
Bye-bye.